Some secrets don't stay buried, no matter how much money you throw on top of them. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe to the channel. On a clear October morning in Manhattan, the Carter twins looked like the picture of American success. Ethan and Lucas Carter, Caucasian, mid-30s, tall, with neatly trimmed light beards and the same carefully styled brown hair, stepped out of their black Escalade in front of a glass tower that bore their last name in steel letters, Carter Group. To the cameras and phones angled in their direction, they were everything people loved to watch online. Handsome, polished, philanthropic, and impossibly rich. Ethan, in a navy suit and pale blue tie, raised a hand in a relaxed wave. The charming one, the twin who could turn any hostile question into a soundbite. Lucas, in a charcoal suit, darker and more controlled, checked his watch instead, the numbers man, the strategist who rarely spoke unless it mattered. Together, they were a brand, the Carter brothers, tech investors turned real estate moguls, regulars on magazine covers and morning shows. The reporters outside the building were used to these daily arrivals, soft questions, feel-good headlines, the twins who give back, brothers turning millions into change. But that morning, as Ethan smiled and Lucas nodded to the crowd, someone new stood a step back from the usual media pack. She wasn't holding a TV microphone. She had no camera crew, just a worn leather notebook and a small digital recorder in her hand. Her press badge hung from a simple black lanyard, Rachel Moore, the Sentinel. Ethan noticed her first. Her eyes didn't do what most people's eyes did around them. They didn't flick nervously between the twins, trying to spot differences. She looked at them like she had already decided who they were, like she'd read the last page of a book they thought they'd hidden. "Morning, gentlemen," a familiar entertainment reporter called out. "Big charity gala tonight, right?" "Any hint about the surprise announcement?" Ethan smiled. "You know we love a good surprise," he replied smoothly. "But I can promise this. Tonight is about second chances. That's all I'll say." Polite laughter. Camera shutters. Everything normal. Then Rachel's voice cut through the noise, calm and steady. "Ethan, Lucas, one question." Lucas's head snapped toward her, just a fraction too quickly. Ethan covered it with a friendly grin. "Sure," he said, still walking toward the revolving doors. "Make it a good one." Rachel stepped forward, holding up her recorder. 10 years ago, she began, in a town called Westbridge, Ohio, a factory fire killed 3 workers on the night shift. Officially, it was ruled an accident, but I've been speaking with someone who says your family paid a lot of money to make sure it stayed that way. The sidewalk noise dropped a few decibels. The other reporters froze. Some raised their cameras higher. Some glanced at each other, trying to decide if this was insane or brilliant. Ethan's smile didn't vanish, but it stiffened at the edges. "I'm sorry. Who are you with?" he asked, buying time. "The Sentinel," Rachel answered, "and the someone I spoke with. He used to work for your father. He says the Carters hid a crime. He says your father ordered that fire." The name, their father, landed like a weight between them. Even years after his death, just hearing it out loud in public made Ethan's throat tighten. Lucas's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking as he stared at Rachel like she had just walked into the middle of a funeral. "Ma'am, that's ridiculous," Ethan said, a practiced edge slipping into his tone. "Our father built safe facilities. He was audited more than any man in the state. A tragedy in Ohio has nothing to do with—" "I have documents," Rachel cut in, but not aggressively, just factually. "Old insurance records, photos of the fire exits, witness testimonies. There's a man who claims he was paid cash to lie on the stand. I'm giving you a chance to comment before this goes live." "This is not the place," Lucas said quietly, his voice low enough that only those closest heard the warning in it. For a heartbeat, the twins looked at each other, an entire conversation in a single glance. They had been doing that since childhood, finishing each other's thoughts without words. But this time, both of them knew exactly what the other was thinking. Someone finally found it. The secret they had agreed years ago would never surface. The truth only two people in the world still knew, and one of them was standing right beside them. "You want a quote?" Ethan finally said, his smile gone now. "Here's your quote. Accusing a dead man can't get you sued for defamation, but it can still destroy your career when you have nothing to back it up. Have a good day." He turned sharply toward the doors. Lucas followed, but his steps faltered for a split second when his eyes met Rachel's. She saw it, just a flicker, but it was enough. Guilt. Not the outrage of a man falsely accused. Something older, heavier. Rachel wrote nothing down. She already had what she needed. Not words, not yet, but something better. A crack. As the glass doors closed behind the twins, muffling the city noise, Ethan exhaled hard. "She's fishing," he muttered. "She has nothing." Lucas didn't answer right away. He stared at their reflection in the elevator's mirrored wall. Two versions of the same man in expensive suits, standing side by side, bound together by blood and by a night they never talked about. "What if she does?" Lucas finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan looked at his brother, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure which of them was more afraid, the one who'd spent a decade trying to forget, or the one who knew that some things, once uncovered, would drag them both back to the darkest night of their lives. He had no idea the worst was yet to come. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than usual. The numbers blinked past in silence, the soft orchestral music doing nothing to cut through the tension pressing between the brothers. As soon as the doors slid open into the private penthouse office level, Ethan walked ahead, shoulders tight, his usual easy posture gone. Their floor was a world above Manhattan, the glass walls showing the city like a moving painting, the marble floors and curated art pieces reminding anyone who entered that the Carters had arrived and planned to stay. "Get PR in the conference room. Now." Ethan snapped at his assistant without slowing down. "Yes, Mr. Carter," she answered, already reaching for her phone. Lucas trailed behind him, not saying a word, feeling like his own footsteps echoed louder than they should. The receptionist smiled automatically as they passed, then let it fade when she caught a glimpse of Ethan's expression. Something was wrong. Everyone could sense it. Inside Ethan's office, a wide space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of Central Park, Ethan finally turned, closing the door behind Lucas with a sharp click. "That was nothing," he said, as if continuing an argument he'd started in his head, a nobody from some mid-tier paper trying to make a name for herself. Lucas stood near the window, staring down at the tiny people and tiny cars far below. "She knew about Westbridge," he said quietly. "You think that's nothing?" Ethan moved to the bar cart in the corner and poured himself a glass of water, but his hand trembled, ice clinking against the glass. "People know things. The town was in the news for weeks back then. Nothing she said proves anything." Lucas turned from the window, his eyes darker than usual. "She said she had documents, witnesses. That's not just a wild guess." Ethan stared at his brother. The resemblance between them had always been uncanny, but right then he hated it, hated seeing his own fear reflected back at him. "We were kids," Ethan said. "We were 24. It was Dad's company, Dad's decisions. And he's gone." Lucas's jaw tightened. "You really think that matters if she digs deep enough?" The space between them filled with the memory they rarely let themselves touch. An old brick factory on the edge of a small Ohio town. Smoke thick in the sky. Sirens, their father's hand gripping Ethan's shoulder, his voice low and steel-hard. "We handle this in-house. You boys say nothing. You saw nothing." A knock at the door broke the silence. Their head of PR, Melissa Grant stepped inside with a tablet in hand, followed by their legal counsel, David Reynolds, still in his coat, breath slightly short as if he'd rushed up the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator. "What happened?" Melissa asked, looking from one twin to the other. "Some journalist tried to ambush us downstairs," Ethan said, sliding back into his public voice, though the edges were still harsh. "She brought up a decade-old factory fire in Ohio, said Dad was responsible, that we covered it up." David's eyebrows lifted just barely. "Name? Rachel Moore, from the Sentinel." David exhaled through his nose. "The Sentinel isn't a tabloid," he said slowly. "They don't usually chase ghosts unless they think there's a body." "That fire was ruled an accident," Ethan fired back. "Yes," David agreed carefully. "Legally, that's what the record shows." He glanced briefly at Lucas, as if measuring how much he might know. "What exactly did she say she had?" "Insurance documents, witness testimonies, someone who used to work for Dad," Lucas answered before Ethan could spin it. "She's not guessing, she's building something." Melissa's fingers flew over her tablet, searching. "She hasn't published anything yet," she said. "No teaser, no social media thread. If she's real, she's still in the investigation stage." "Then we shut it down at the investigation stage," Ethan said. "You've done it before, Melissa. We bury this. We discredit her if we have to. David, send something threatening and scary with legal words. Whatever you people do." David watched him for a long moment. "If she really has a former employee willing to talk on the record, pushing too hard could make it worse," he cautioned. "It could look like intimidation." "It is intimidation," Ethan said. "That's the point." Lucas folded his arms, feeling the familiar split tearing at him. The part of him that had been raised in the Carter house, where problems were solved with checks and pressure and lawyers, and the other part, the one that still heard the screams in his dreams when he thought about Westbridge. "Maybe we should actually see what she has," Lucas said slowly. "If there's anything wrong with the original report," Ethan rounded on him. "There's nothing wrong with the report." Lucas held his gaze. "You don't know that." "I know Dad," Ethan shot back. "He did what he had to do to protect the company, to protect us. And 3 people died," Lucas said softly. The room went silent. Melissa shifted her weight, looking down. David's jaw moved once, as if he wanted to say something but decided against it. "Finally," David cleared his throat. "Legally, our best move is to request her evidence, offer to cooperate on the condition that she shares what she believes she's found. It'll look transparent, sympathetic. It gives us time, and if there are discrepancies, we can attack the credibility." Ethan nodded, latching onto the word attack like a lifeline. "Do it." Lucas didn't agree, but he didn't disagree either. Not out loud. In the Carter family, silence had always been its own kind of consent. Down on the street, Rachel walked away from the Carter Tower, weaving through the crowd with purpose. She could still feel the weight of Lucas's stare on her skin, the crack of guilt she'd seen, just for a second. She turned the corner, ducked into a quieter side street, and pulled out her phone. A voicemail from an unknown Midwest number waited at the top of her screen. Her heart hitched. She put the phone to her ear. "Ms. Moore, this is Daniel Price," a male voice said, rough, older, with a slight Ohio drawl. "You left a message at the diner. I worked at the Carter plant in Westbridge. I was there the night it burned. I think I'm ready to tell you what really happened, but I can't talk on the phone. If they find out I spoke to you, I'm dead. You understand? Meet me where the factory used to be. Tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Don't bring anyone." The message ended with a click. Rachel lowered the phone, the city suddenly feeling louder around her. She had been chasing the Carters for months, following paper trails, whispers, old rumors buried in local archives. But this was different. This was a door opening or a trap. She slid the phone into her pocket and looked up at the skyline. The Carter name gleamed from the tower behind her like a challenge. Everyone thought the past was buried in that small Ohio town, but what came next changed everything. By the time Rachel crossed the state line into Ohio, the sky had turned the color of wet concrete. The GPS led her off the highway and onto narrower roads, past fields gone flat and brown with the coming winter. Westbridge appeared slowly, first a faded billboard welcoming visitors, then clusters of small houses with peeling paint and sagging porches. She'd looked at this town 100 times on satellite images and old news clips, but seeing it through the windshield of her rented car made it feel heavier, real. A place that had learned to live with something burned into its bones. She parked a few blocks from where the factory used to stand. There was no security fence, no warning signs, just an empty lot choked by weeds and broken concrete, bordered by rusting chain link and a row of crooked utility poles. The silhouette of the old loading dock still remained, a raised concrete lip and some crumbling metal beams jutting into the dark like ribs. The air smelled different here. Damp earth, distant wood smoke, and something else that made her skin prickle, a ghost of burned plastic and chemicals that probably only existed in her mind by now. It was 8:54 p.m. Rachel checked her watch, then scanned the lot. No one. She slid her phone into her jacket pocket, the recorder into the other, and stepped through a gap in the fence. Gravel crunched under her boots. A stray dog barked in the distance. Somewhere a train horn sounded, long and lonely. "You picked a hell of a meeting spot, Daniel," she muttered. She moved toward what remained of the factory floor, the moonlight catching on twisted rebar and shards of glass. In the center of the lot, the concrete was stained darker, a wide, uneven patch where the fire had burned hottest. She had seen this area in old crime scene photos, but standing in the middle of it was something else. She swallowed, throat suddenly dry. "Miss Moore?" The voice drifted out from the shadows near the old loading dock. Male, wary. Rachel turned, heart jumping. "Daniel?" A man stepped into the thin beam of the streetlight. He was in his late 50s or early 60s, shoulders stooped, a grey beard creeping along his jaw. He wore a faded Carhartt jacket and a cap pulled low, as if that could make him invisible. His eyes, though, those were sharp, moving constantly, checking the lot, the road, the darkness beyond. "You came alone?" he asked. "Yes," Rachel said. "I told you I would." He nodded once, as if that was the first test. "Phones?" "In my pocket," she said. "Recording device too. I won't pretend I'm not a journalist. That's why I'm here." He hesitated, then jerked his chin. "Take 'em out. Put 'em on that concrete block there." She did as he asked, setting both devices where he could see them. The cold air bit at her fingers, her heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "You said you were there the night of the fire." "I was," Daniel said. He stepped closer, the lines on his face deeper now. Regret carved into skin. Night shift supervisor, 18 years in this place before it went up. He looked past her, eyes landing on the blackened patch of concrete. For a moment, his expression changed, like he was seeing flames instead of shadow. "Everyone here was told it was the wiring," Rachel said. "Faulty system, old building, a terrible accident." "That's what we were told to say," Daniel replied. "What we were paid to say." Rachel felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "Paid by who?" He let out a humorless laugh. "Who do you think? The Carters didn't send some nobody. They flew in the man himself." "Michael Carter," Rachel said softly. "The twins' father." The name still carried weight in business schools and industry articles. A legend. A builder. Daniel's jaw tightened. He came in the morning after the fire. Before the investigators could finish their first sweep, whole town was still in shock. Smoke still in the air. He walked this lot like he owned it, which, I guess, he did. Rachel stayed quiet, letting the silence open space for the truth. "He called me into a makeshift office in a trailer," Daniel went on. "There was this lawyer with him, some guy with a fancy watch and a briefcase. Carter asked me what I saw. I told him the truth. I told him about the complaints we'd filed about the storage room, about the chemicals stacked wrong, the overloaded outlets, the alarms that only worked when they felt like it." "What did he say?" "He looked at me like I was a problem to solve," Daniel said. "Then he told me what I would say, to OSHA, to the insurance people, to anyone who asked." Rachel's fingers itched to reach for her recorder, but she forced them to stay still. "And when you refused—" "I didn't refuse." The admission came out like a confession. "He slid a file across the table," Daniel said. "Had my whole life in it, my mortgage, my medical bills, my daughter's tuition, stuff I'd never told anyone at work. And he said, 'You're a good man, Mr. Price. You've given a lot to this company. I'd hate for you to lose everything because of one misunderstanding.'" "Blackmail," Rachel whispered. "Bribery," Daniel corrected. "Blackmail would have meant he had something on me. He just had money, lots of it." Rachel took a breath. "Daniel, I have older articles, local stories. They say 3 people died that night. Is that true?" His eyes flicked to hers, sharp again. "That's what the official report says." "But it's not the truth." He looked back at the dark stain on the ground. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. 4 people died. One of them didn't make it into any report." The hairs on Rachel's arms rose. "Who?" she asked. He hesitated, as if crossing an invisible line. "There was a temp worker. No family listed. Came in through an agency. Young, maybe 19. He was in the storage room when the fire started." "How do you know?" "Because I saw him," Daniel said. "I pulled the alarm, but it was late. Too late. The heat was already—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "When the fire crews finally got control, there was talk about a 4th body, but then the chief got called into that same trailer. After that, there were only 3. Rachel's mind raced. "You're saying the Carters paid to make a death disappear?" "I'm saying this town owes those boys more than the official story says," Daniel replied, his gaze hard. "And I'm saying their families were never told, because as far as the world's concerned, those boys don't exist." "Boys." Rachel's thoughts skidded. "You said those boys, plural." Daniel froze, like he'd realized he'd said too much. Slip of the tongue. "No." Rachel pressed gently. "You're careful, Daniel. I can hear it. You don't make slips like that." "What boys?" He opened his mouth, then glanced suddenly over her shoulder, his eyes narrowing. Rachel turned. At the edge of the lot, headlights swept slowly across the weeds, then clicked off. A dark SUV idled there, engine low. No one got out. Daniel's breath hitched. "You brought someone." "I didn't," Rachel said quickly. "I swear to you, Doesn't matter," he cut in, his voice shaking now. "They know. They always know." He stepped back into the shadows. "Daniel, wait. You print what I just told you, they'll know it came from me," he said. "I needed you to hear it, but I ain't dying for this. Not now. Not after all this time." "Please," Rachel insisted, taking a step toward him. "Just tell me what you meant about the boys. Did you see someone else that night? But he was already moving away, fading into the dark between the concrete pillars. Within seconds, he was gone. Rachel stood alone in the middle of the ruined factory, the sound of her own breathing loud in her ears. The SUV's engine revved once, then the vehicle backed up and disappeared down the road without its lights on. She walked back to the concrete block, hands shaking now as she picked up her phone and recorder. No calls, no messages, no proof of the SUV except the chill running down her spine. But she had something else. The beginnings of a story too big to ignore. 4 victims, not 3. A paid lie. A vanished body. And a slip. Those boys. Back in Manhattan, high above the city, Lucas Carter lay awake in his penthouse bedroom, staring at the ceiling. He could almost smell smoke, even though there was none. In the quiet, his phone buzzed on the nightstand with a new email. From David Reynolds. Subject, The Sentinel Inquiry, Strategy and Exposure. Lucas opened it, scanning quickly, legal terms, PR language, risk assessments, and then a sentence that made his chest tighten. Given your personal presence in Westbridge at the time, it is critical that we maintain a unified narrative. Unified narrative. That was a lawyer's way of saying what his father had always said more bluntly. We stick to the story, no matter what. Lucas's hand hovered over the reply button, his heart pounding. For the first time in his life, he wondered what would happen if, just once, he didn't. Everyone thought it was over. It wasn't. If this story is already touching you, leave a like. It helps the channel a lot. The next morning, New York woke up to rain and notifications. Rachel's story wasn't live yet, but the machine had started turning. She sat at her cluttered desk at the Sentinel, surrounded by stacks of printouts, old photos, and a half-eaten bagel growing cold beside her laptop. The newsroom buzzed around her, ringing phones, low conversations, the clack of keyboards. But her world had shrunk to one thing: Westbridge. On her screen, grainy images from a decade-old local news broadcast played on loop. Fire trucks, smoke, the remains of the factory. A reporter in a heavy coat describing 3 confirmed fatalities, while the words "tragic accident" scrolled beneath. Rachel paused the video on a single frame, firefighters carrying out a covered stretcher. In the background, barely visible, a younger man stood near the police tape, dark suit, hands in his pockets, face half turned away. She zoomed in, the picture pixelated, but the shape of his jaw was unmistakable. Lucas Carter. She checked the timestamp. The footage was from early morning, just hours after the fire. The official narrative had always been that Michael Carter handled the fallout alone, far from the eyes of his sons. But here was Lucas, 24 years old, standing on the edge of the wreckage. Rachel's editor, Mark, appeared beside her desk with a coffee in hand, mid-40s, sleeves rolled up, eyes permanently tired. "You look like someone who hasn't slept," he said. "I went to Ohio," she replied without preamble. "Met Daniel Price, night supervisor. He says the Carters paid him to lie, and he says there were 4 deaths, not 3. Mark's expression shifted. "You get it on tape?" Rachel hesitated. "Part of it. He made me put the recorder aside at first. I tried to reconstruct it after, but..." She shrugged. "It's not as clean as I'd like." "Okay," Mark said slowly. "So we've got a scared witness, a missing body, and a powerful family with every reason to crush this before it breathes. What else?" She clicked to a scanned PDF of an old fire department report. "Early draft of the incident log," she said. "I pulled this from a retired captain's boxes. It mentions an unidentified male believed deceased in storage area. Later versions don't. The line's gone." Mark leaned in. "Who removed it? That's the problem. Paper trail cuts off after that draft. All the official copies on file show 3 fatalities. But someone edited this one by hand." She zoomed in on the image. A thin black line scratched through the sentence. Beside it, in small, tight handwriting, "Per counsel." "Counsel," Mark repeated, "as in lawyers." "Carter lawyers," Rachel said. "Who else had that kind of power back then?" Mark rubbed his jaw. "Okay, let's say we run with it. We're essentially accusing one of the most influential families in the country of suppressing a death and tampering with a fire investigation. We need more than a scared supervisor and a scratched-out line." "And what if the missing piece is connected to them more directly?" she asked. He frowned. "Meaning?" Rachel brought up the paused news clip, zoomed in again on Lucas's blurred silhouette. "He was there," she said. Everyone believed the twins were kept far away from the mess, but at least one of them wasn't. Mark stared at the screen. "It's thin, Rachel." "I know," she said, "but Daniel slipped last night. He said those boys when he was talking about the victims. And when I pushed, he shut down. What if the missing victim isn't just some temp worker? What if the reason the Carters buried him is personal?" "Like what?" "A relative they didn't want associated with the company. Or someone they were responsible for," Rachel said quietly. "Someone the twins were responsible for." Mark sighed, then straightened. "All right. Here's what we do. You request formal comment from the Carters. Lay out what you have without showing your hand completely. Meanwhile, we keep digging. I'll get a second reporter on document work. You go after Lucas. He's the weak link." "I thought Ethan was the public face," she said. "Exactly," Mark replied. "Ethan thrives on cameras. He knows how to dance. Lucas disappears into his spreadsheets. People like that. They're the ones who crack when the story stops matching the numbers." Across town, in a minimalist office lined with framed magazine covers, Ethan paced while Melissa projected social media feeds onto the large screen at the end of the room. Tweets, business forums, and investor chats, mostly about the Carters' upcoming charity gala, not about Westbridge. Not yet. "We've got a small spike in mentions of Carter Fire and Westbridge," Melissa said. "Looks like chatter from locals, nothing major, but someone will connect it sooner or later." Ethan checked his watch. The gala was in 3 days. A carefully choreographed event meant to rebrand the Carter brothers as champions of prison reform and second chances. The irony made his skin itch now. "We control the narrative," Ethan said. "We always have. This is no different." Lucas sat at the end of the conference table, a file open in front of him, but he wasn't reading. His eyes were unfocused, locked on some middle distance only he could see. "Lucas," Ethan said sharply, "you with us?" He blinked. "Yeah, I'm here." David slid a printed email across to them. "You need to see this," he said. The subject line was clear: request for comment. The Sentinel investigation into Westbridge fire. Rachel's message was concise, professional, and dangerous. She laid out what she intended to publish: allegations of suppressed safety complaints, potential evidence of tampering with official records, and testimony from a former employee claiming he'd been paid to lie. In the final paragraph, she added a line that made Ethan swear under his breath. "We have also obtained confirmation that at least one of the Carter sons was present at the scene during the immediate aftermath of the fire. We will be reporting this unless you can provide clarifying context." "Where did she get that?" Ethan demanded. "We were told all the local footage was handled." David's expression didn't change. "Apparently, some wasn't. Old tapes, maybe. People kept things, they always do." Lucas felt his throat close. "She knows I was there," he said quietly. Ethan pointed a finger at him. "Because you wouldn't stay on the plane," he snapped. "Dad told you to let him deal with it, but you had to see for yourself. I watched people pull bodies out of a building with our name on the paychecks." Lucas shot back, voice low but intense. "Forgive me for wanting to understand what we'd done." "What he'd done," Ethan corrected immediately. "Dad made those calls, not us." Lucas looked down at the email again, at Rachel's calm, relentless words. "Unless you can provide clarifying context." "What if we did?" he asked slowly. Ethan stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "What? You want to hand her a confession? That we paid people off? That we erased a body from the record?" "We didn't erase anyone," Lucas said, but the words tasted wrong in his mouth. "We were kids." "And we're not now," Ethan replied, "which means we understand how this works. If this story breaks the way she's framing it, we don't just take a PR hit, we lose investors, partnerships, the foundation. Our entire second chance initiative looks like a joke." Melissa cleared her throat. "We could try a different angle," she suggested carefully. "Offer her an exclusive on the gala. Access, interviews, make it worth her while to shelve Westbridge in favor of something more uplifting." Lucas almost laughed. "You think someone like her is going to trade a buried factory fire for a red carpet puff piece?" "People like her like careers," Ethan replied. "Big access buys careers." David folded his hands. "We can also question her sources. Put pressure on the witness. If he recants, she has nothing solid." Lucas's stomach dropped. "You mean Daniel?" "I mean whoever she has," David said neutrally. "If someone like that suddenly decides they remembered wrong, it changes the story." Lucas pictured Daniel's haunted eyes in that old Westbridge file. He'd seen the man's name before, tucked deep in the incident reports. Just a line item once. Now a person. "No," Lucas said quietly. The room went still. Ethan turned to him slowly. "What did you say?" "I said no," Lucas repeated, louder this time. "We're not going after some old supervisor in a dying town just because we're scared. We've done enough damage there." For a moment, no one spoke. Melissa looked between the brothers, recognizing a kind of fault line opening. Ethan's voice, when it came, was soft and dangerous. "You remember what Dad said the night he came back from Westbridge?" Lucas closed his eyes briefly. He remembered every word. Michael Carter, standing in the dark of their family balcony, city lights spread below, telling his sons, "This family is built on what we survive, not what we confess." "Things are different now," Lucas said. "Dad's gone." Ethan stepped closer. "Our name isn't." They stood there, mirror images in tailored suits, separated by something older than the company and wider than the table between them. Finally, Ethan turned away, jaw clenched. "David, draft a response. We deny any wrongdoing. We question her sources without naming them. We emphasize our charitable work and our commitment to safety." "What about my presence at the scene?" Lucas asked. Ethan paused. "We spin it," he said. "Compassionate Air rushes to support grieving town. You were there to donate, to meet with families. Heart of gold stuff. We lean on that." Lucas nodded slowly, feeling something inside him start to fracture. They were lying again, layering new stories on top of old ashes. In a quiet corner of the Sentinel newsroom, Rachel's inbox pinged. The Carter Group had replied faster than she expected. She opened the attached statement and read it once, then again. Denial, condemnation of baseless accusations, a reminder of their long-standing philanthropic efforts. A neat little narrative about a young Lucas Carter personally visiting Westbridge to comfort victims' families and oversee support initiatives. Rachel leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. There it was, the crack. If he had been there, she could find someone who saw him, someone who remembered what really happened that day. She pulled out her notebook and flipped to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote 2 names in block letters: Lucas Carter, Daniel Price. Then, underneath, 3 more words: those boys. Why? What came next would bind those 3 lines together in a way none of them were ready for. By late afternoon, Westbridge felt smaller. Rachel sat in a corner booth of the town's only busy diner, a place with cracked vinyl seats and a bell over the door that rang every time someone came in from the cold. The walls were lined with old photographs, high school teams, county fairs, a black and white shot of the factory when it first opened, its windows still intact, its paint not yet peeled by time and negligence. Her notebook lay open in front of her. On the top line, "Who saw Lucas?" A waitress in her 50s topped off Rachel's coffee and glanced at the page. "You working on that fire again?" she asked. Her name tag said Marlene. She had the look of someone who'd spent a lifetime hearing other people's stories but never told her own. Rachel didn't bother pretending otherwise. "Yeah," she said. You were around back then. Marlene snorted. Honey, I was filling mugs in this same spot while half this town stood across the street watching the factory burn. Nobody forgets that night. Rachel flipped the notebook around, showing her a printed, grainy still of young Lucas near the fire line. Do you remember seeing him? She asked. This man, he would have been in his 20s, from the Carter family. Marlene squinted. Then her eyebrows went up. Oh, yeah. I remember him, she said slowly. Came in here the next morning. Suit, tie, the whole Wall Street thing. Looked like he'd slept in that jacket. Rachel straightened. He came in here, alone? With his daddy, Marlene replied. Big man, that one. Didn't order food, just coffee. They sat in that booth. She pointed to a table near the window. They talked real quiet. But this town learned to lip-read a long time ago. What did you see? Marlene hesitated, wiping the same clean spot on the table as if she could erase the memory. The young one, him, he was shaking, kept saying, We should have shut it down, Dad. We knew it wasn't safe. And the old man said something like, What we know stays inside this family. Did you tell anyone? Marlene let out a humorless laugh. Tell who? The sheriff who plays golf with out-of-towners whenever a rich man's jet lands. People around here learned quick. You talk too loud, you stop getting hours, your kids don't get hired. Westbridge works for whoever owns the plant. Back then, that was the Carters. Rachel wrote fast, noting every detail. Anyone else hear that conversation? Half the diner, Marlene said. But if you're looking for someone who'll go on camera about it, she shrugged. Good luck. Folks here are tired and broke. Carter money still runs through our veins, even if the plant's gone. Rachel chewed on the end of her pen. What about Daniel Price? She asked. Have you seen him recently? A shadow passed over Marlene's expression. Danny, she said cautiously, he keeps to himself now, doesn't come in much. Not since the fire. Why? Rachel considered how much to reveal. I met with him last night at the old lot, she said. He's scared. Someone's making sure he stays that way. Marlene's gaze flicked toward the window, where the reflection of the street outside shimmered on the glass. Then you should be careful, she said quietly, because if they're still watching him after all these years, they're watching you now too. Across state lines, in the quiet hum of a private jet, Lucas stared out at the clouds. He hadn't told Ethan he was flying to Ohio. Officially, he was meeting with a Midwestern investor. In reality, he was heading back to the town he'd spent 10 years trying not to think about. He could still hear his father's voice from that day in the diner, low and uncompromising. We acknowledge grief. We do not acknowledge guilt. Do you understand the difference, Lucas? Back then, he'd nodded, because he'd been raised to do so, raised to believe that the family name was something sacred, something worth lying for, if that's what it took. Now, as the jet began its descent, he wasn't so sure. The rental SUV he picked up in Columbus felt too familiar in his hands. He'd driven these roads before, long ago, behind his father's car, his stomach in knots as they approached the glow of emergency lights. Westbridge looked even more worn now, but some things hadn't changed. The diner sign, the church steeple, the distant shape of a ruined factory on the horizon. He parked a block away from Daniel's small house, a sagging two-story with paint peeling in sheets and a yard full of overgrown bushes. For a moment, Lucas sat with his hands on the wheel, wondering what exactly he'd come to say. I'm sorry. Felt too small. Tell the truth, felt too big. He finally stepped out and walked up the path. Before he could knock, the door opened. Daniel stood there, eyes hard, like he'd been watching the street. You got some nerve, he said. Lucas froze. You know who I am. Daniel snorted. You think people just forget a Carter face around here? I saw you at the fire. I saw you in that diner. And I saw the checks that came later with your family name on them. Lucas swallowed. I'm not here to threaten you, he said. I'm not here on behalf of our lawyers. Then why are you here? Because a journalist came to you, Lucas said honestly, and because if you're talking, it means you've been carrying something you shouldn't have had to carry alone. Daniel studied him for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he opened the door wider. 5 minutes, he said. You get 5 minutes before I decide if I'm slamming this in your face. Inside, the house smelled faintly of old coffee and mechanic's oil. Framed photos lined a narrow hallway, kids in Halloween costumes, a woman laughing in a sunlit backyard, a set of twin boys on a little league field, caps crooked, arms slung around each other's shoulders. Lucas's steps faltered. The boys couldn't have been more than 10 in the picture, identical, their grins wide, their eyes bright. You have twins, Lucas said softly. Had, Daniel replied. Eli and Owen. They were 14 when this town dried up enough that I begged the plant for any extra hours they could give me. The Carters were hiring temps. I asked if they could take on boys that young. Lucas turned to him slowly. A memory flickered at the edge of his mind, someone mentioning the supervisor's kids that night, his father's mouth tightening with anger. They said no, right? Lucas asked, hope edging his voice. Daniel's laugh was short and bitter. Your father said no on paper, he said. Off the books. As long as they stayed quiet and did what they were told, nobody cared. Cheap hands, quick learners. Boys listened to their daddies. Lucas's chest tightened. You're telling me your sons were in the building that night, Daniel finished. Yeah, both of them. The room swayed for a second. Lucas grabbed the back of a chair. The reports only list 3 men, he said, though he already knew how hollow that sounded. That's what happens when someone with money decides bodies are numbers, Daniel said. He moved to a small table and picked up a framed photo. 2 teenagers now, taller, but still unmistakably the boys from the hallway. He set it between them. When they pulled folks out of that mess, they found Owen. Burned so bad, the coroner said it was a mercy he died fast. Eli, his voice caught, Eli wasn't with him. Lucas stared at the picture, at the way these boys mirrored each other, the way he mirrored Ethan. A sharp, cold understanding crept in. You told the journalist 4 people died, Lucas said quietly, but only Owen is in the official record. Who's the 4th? Daniel's eyes bored into his. You tell me, he said, because the night after the fire, your father called me back into that trailer, said there was a complication, said one of my boys wasn't dead after all, said he'd been hurt bad, but he could disappear the problem and make sure we were taken care of. Lucas's stomach twisted. Disappear? How? Daniel's gaze drifted to the front window, where the gray sky pressed against the glass. He offered me a deal, he said. Sign the papers. Say I only had 1 son in that building, take the settlement, and Eli would be moved somewhere with the best care money can buy. New name, new town, new life. But I'd never see him again. For his own good, he said. For your good, for the company's. Lucas felt suddenly lightheaded. His father's signature loomed in his memory, neat, controlled, on dozens of NDAs and settlements. You signed, he whispered. I signed, Daniel said, hatred and self-loathing tangled together in his voice, because I was standing there with a dead child in a bag, and the other one screaming in a hospital bed, and a billionaire telling me this was the only way either of us survived. So yeah, 4 people died that week, Mr. Carter, Owen, Eli, and whatever was left of me and their mama. The words hung in the air like smoke. So when I said those boys, Daniel went on, quieter now, I wasn't just talking about the ones who worked the floor. I was talking about my sons. The twins this town never got to mourn properly. The twins your family turned into a number and a line item. Outside, a car passed slowly, tires crunching over gravel. Daniel's eyes flicked toward the door. You shouldn't be here, he said. If your brother finds out, I don't care what Ethan thinks. Lucas cut in, surprising himself with the force of it. If there's even a chance Eli is alive out there somewhere under a false name, don't you want to—" He was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. 3 quick raps, precise and unfriendly. Daniel's face drained of color. "That's not a neighbor's knock," he whispered. Lucas's heart lurched. He knew that rhythm. Corporate security, their security. What came next, he realized, might destroy more than just a company's reputation. The knock came again. 3 sharp, measured hits that sounded like they'd practiced them. Daniel's hand went instinctively to the deadbolt, stopping just short. "Don't answer," Lucas said quietly. "Then they'll know I'm hiding something," Daniel whispered back. "Men like that, they smell fear before they even step off the porch." Another knock. This time, a voice followed. Calm, polite, wrong. "Mr. Price, my name is Carter. I believe we know some of the same people." Lucas felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. Not Ethan, not their last name, but Carter, the word itself used like a key. He moved quickly, grabbing Daniel's arm. "Back door," Lucas hissed. "Go now." Daniel yanked his arm free. "If I run, they'll go after my daughter," he snapped in a harsh whisper. "She still uses my last name. You don't get it. You boys always had somewhere else to go." Lucas swallowed whatever argument he'd been about to make. He did get it. That was the problem. "Mr. Price," the voice called again, still pleasant, still patient. "We just want to clear up some confusion. There's been a lot of talk lately, talk that could complicate things for you." Daniel glanced at the framed photo of his boys on the table, then at Lucas. A decision flickered across his face. "You go," he muttered. "Side door off the kitchen. If they see you here, this gets ugly fast." "I'm not leaving you," Lucas said. "You already did," Daniel shot back. 10 years ago, when your daddy offered me that deal. You don't get to fix that in one visit." The words hit harder than any punch. Lucas hesitated, then took a step toward the kitchen. He found the narrow side door, hand on the handle, then stopped. Because running was exactly what his father would have done. He turned back, jaw set. "Open it," he told Daniel, "but leave the chain on." Daniel stared at him like he was crazy. "You ain't built for this kind of trouble, son." "Neither are you," Lucas replied, "but they brought it to your door anyway." After a long moment, Daniel shuffled to the front, fingers fumbling with the lock. He slid the deadbolt back, but kept the short chain in place, opening the door just enough to see through the gap. On the porch stood a man in an expensive overcoat, early 40s, with the kind of posture that said he spent his days sitting in other people's offices and not being told no. Behind him, a second man in a dark suit, broader, with an earpiece curling behind his ear. The first man smiled when he saw Daniel. "Mr. Price," he said, "I'm so glad you're home. I'm Thomas Carter, from the Carter Group's Risk and Compliance Division. We spoke briefly a few years ago when we renewed your settlement terms." "Didn't sound like a question then," Daniel muttered. "Doesn't sound like one now." Thomas's eyes flicked to the chain on the door, but he didn't comment. "We've heard there's been renewed interest in old events," he said. "A journalist, I believe, Rachel Moore." Daniel's throat worked. "You get your information fast," he said. "We have to," Thomas replied pleasantly. "It's a complicated world." He adjusted his cuffs, his smile never touching his eyes. "We're concerned, Mr. Price, that you might have been misled about what you're allowed to say regarding the Westbridge incident." From the hallway, out of sight, Lucas felt his heart pound against his ribs. He could see the side of Thomas's face through the narrow angle. A company man, competent, forgettable in a way that made him dangerous. "The last time I checked," Daniel said, "I still live in a free country." "You live in a country where contracts mean something," Thomas corrected gently, "and your non-disclosure agreement is very clear. Discussing certain interpretations of events could put you in severe legal jeopardy." The man behind him shifted slightly, just enough for Daniel to notice the outline under his jacket that suggested a weapon. Legal jeopardy wasn't the only kind on the table. Daniel's fingers tightened on the door edge. For a second, Lucas thought he was going to slam it shut. Instead, Daniel did something that made Lucas's breath catch. He opened it wider, just enough for Thomas to see past him, straight to where Lucas stood in the hallway. Thomas's expression didn't change, but Lucas saw the moment of recognition flicker in his eyes. "Mr. Carter," he said smoothly, "I didn't realize you were already conducting outreach." Daniel stepped aside, jaw locked. "You wanted clarity," he said. "Well, here's your company, and here's your conscience. Maybe between the two of you, I'll finally get a straight answer." Lucas stepped forward, every instinct screaming at him to step back instead. "You shouldn't be here, Thomas," he said, "not without clearing it with me or my brother." Thomas's smile thinned. "My understanding was that the board empowered my department to act in the company's best interest," he said carefully. "Sometimes that requires initiative." "Intimidating witnesses isn't a best interest," Lucas replied. "It's a crime." The man in the suit shifted again. Thomas lifted a hand slightly, stopping him. "We're just having a conversation," he said. "No need for dramatics. Mr. Price, we simply want to remind you of the protections your agreement gives you. If this journalist publishes inaccuracies tied to your name, you could find yourself dragged into a very public, very ugly mess." Daniel's eyes flicked between the two men, the billionaire heir and the corporate cleaner. "And what happens if I tell her everything anyway?" he asked. "What if I tell her about the fourth boy, about Eli?" A muscle ticked in Thomas's cheek. "Then you'd be admitting to signing false statements a decade ago," he said. "You might face charges. Your settlement could be clawed back. Your daughter could lose the house, your health coverage. It would be unfortunate." Lucas felt something hot flare in his chest. Shame, anger, both. He thought of the foundation he and Ethan were about to celebrate at their gala, Second Horizon, dedicated to giving people new chances when the system failed them. The hypocrisy made him feel sick. "Enough," Lucas said. "We're not here to threaten Mr. Price. We're here to listen. If he wants to speak to the press, that's his right." Thomas turned to him fully now. "With respect, sir," he said softly, "you didn't build the protections that keep this company standing. Your father did. He understood what could happen if the wrong story got out. I'm just honoring his legacy." Lucas took a step closer, lowering his voice. "My father is dead," he said, "and his legacy is not a shield for you to hide behind when you scare people." For the first time, Thomas's calm slipped, just a fraction. "If you'd like me to brief your brother, I'll brief him myself," Lucas cut in. "You and your friend are going to get back in your car. You're going to leave this man alone. And if I hear you've contacted him again, I will personally recommend to the board that your department be audited and dissolved." It was a bluff. Lucas knew it. Thomas knew it. The board answered to results, not morality, but something in Lucas's expression, some resolve that hadn't been there in previous years, made Thomas hesitate. He weighed his options. 2 Carters, one dead, one very much alive and apparently growing a spine. A witness who'd already talked, a journalist who wouldn't scare easily. "We'll continue this discussion in New York," Thomas said finally, the words edged with warning. "Where it belongs." He inclined his head to Daniel, all fake politeness again. "Please remember what's at stake, Mr. Price. Sometimes silence is the kindest choice for everyone involved." They left. The car door slammed. Tires rolled away. The house felt too quiet in their wake. Daniel sagged against the doorframe. "You really gonna go after your own people for me?" he asked, not quite believing it. Lucas ran a hand over his face. "I don't know what I'm going to do yet," he admitted. "But I know I'm done pretending my father's version of the story is the only one that matters." He looked at the photo of Eli and Owen again. 2 boys, arms hooked over each other's shoulders, the way he and Ethan had posed 100 times. "I have a journalist's card in my pocket," Lucas said slowly. "If I called her, if I sat down with her and told her everything I know on the record, would you stand with me?" Daniel stared at him for a long time. Then he nodded, once, like it cost him something. "You bring the truth," he said. "I'll bring what's left of mine." Hundreds of miles away, in the glow of the Sentinel's newsroom, Rachel's phone buzzed. Unknown number, East Coast area code. She almost ignored it. Then she answered, "Hello?" There was a pause, a breath, and then a voice she recognized from a sidewalk in Manhattan, now stripped of PR polish. "This is Lucas Carter," he said. "I think it's time we talked, somewhere quiet." Rachel sat up straighter, heart thudding. On her desk, the words she'd written earlier stared back at her. Those boys. Why? She had no idea that the answer would rewrite more than just an article. They met in a hotel bar that tried very hard not to look like a hotel bar. Rachel picked the spot, a quiet boutique place in Midtown, dim lighting, jazz low enough that conversation stayed private. She chose a back booth facing the door, notebook already open, recorder on the table but not yet turned on. Lucas arrived 10 minutes early and still felt late. He wore no tie, his collar open, his hair less perfectly arranged than usual. When he stepped inside, a few heads turned. He was one of those faces people had seen somewhere, even if they couldn't place it. He scanned the room, found her, and walked over like a man heading toward a verdict. "Ms. Moore," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "Rachel," she corrected. "If we're doing this, first names are easier." He nodded, then glanced at the recorder between them. "Is that on?" "Not yet," she said. "Before it is, I need to know why you called me. People in your position don't usually volunteer for this kind of pain." He let out a breath that could have been a laugh in another life. "Maybe I'm not as good at avoiding pain as my brother is," he said. "Or maybe I'm just tired." "Tired of what?" "Tired of being the son who does the math," Lucas replied. "The one who knows exactly how many people had to look the other way for our life to look the way it does." Rachel studied him. Up close, he looked less like a glossy magazine cover and more like a man who hadn't slept properly in a long time. Fine lines at the corners of his eyes, a tightness in his jaw that didn't match the charming sound bites she'd watched on TV. "I met with Daniel Price," she said. "He told me about his sons, about Eli, about the deal your father offered him." Lucas's gaze dropped to his hands. "Then you know more than most," he said quietly. "More than I let myself think about for a long time." "Is Eli alive?" Rachel asked. No preamble, no softening. His shoulders tensed. "I don't know," he said. "Not for sure. All I have is a sentence I overheard in a hallway 10 years ago and a trust fund I wasn't supposed to notice." Rachel flipped to a fresh page in her notebook. "Tell me." He looked at the recorder again. "Turn it on," he said. "If we're doing this, we're doing it on the record." Her thumb pressed the button. The small red light blinked to life. "State your name and role," she said, the ritual grounding her. "Lucas Michael Carter," he said, "co-CEO of the Carter Group." "Tell me about Westbridge." He swallowed, eyes fixed on some invisible point over her shoulder. "My father called us the night of the fire," he began. "My brother and me. He was already there. He told us it was contained and that the company would handle it. Ethan stayed in New York. I couldn't." He described the drive, the flames still smoldering, the smell, the way his father had stood in the middle of chaos like it was just another deal to close. He talked about the diner conversation Marlene had already described, the way his own protests had been smoothed over with phrases like optics and exposure. "And the boys," Rachel pressed gently. "Daniel's twins." Lucas's voice roughened. "I didn't know about them at first, just names on a list. But the night after the fire, I walked past a conference room at the local hospital. The door was cracked. I heard my father asking our lawyers if one of the Price boys could be moved under a private care program. He closed his eyes for a moment, forcing the memory into focus. He said, "If the kid dies, we have one body too many. If he lives, we have a liability. Get him somewhere off the books and make sure the father understands the terms." Rachel's pen stilled. "Off the books where?" Lucas shook his head. "I don't know, but a year later, when I was reviewing our charitable allocations, I found a line item buried in the foundation records, a long-term care facility in another state. One patient listed under a pseudonym, full cost covered indefinitely. No family contact allowed. When I asked about it, I was told it was legacy business and not my concern." "Do you remember the name of the facility?" He nodded. "I wrote it down for you." He reached into his jacket and slid a folded paper across the table. Rachel unfolded it, her heart speeding up at the neat, precise handwriting. The name of a neurological rehab center 3 states away, and a date, 10 years ago. "You think Eli is there?" she said. "I think someone like him might be," Lucas replied. "Maybe not anymore. Patients get moved. But if there's any chance my father bought a boy's silence with a new identity, we owe it to him to find out." Rachel looked at him, really looked at him. "You understand," she said slowly, "that if I publish this, your words, this facility, Daniel's testimony, it doesn't just dent your image. It detonates it. Your brother will be furious. Your board will question your sanity. You could lose everything." Lucas leaned back, the faintest bitter smile touching his mouth. "The funny thing about everything," he said, "is realizing it was never really yours. It was built on someone else's loss, someone else's fire. I've been eating off that fire my whole life and telling myself it was just smart business." He met her eyes. "If I lose the company for telling the truth, maybe that's the only fair trade I've ever made." For a moment, the noise of the bar faded around them, the clink of glasses, the low murmur of other lives, all blurred into a soft hum. Rachel clicked off the recorder but left it on the table. "Okay," she said, "here's what happens next. I verify everything I can. Facility records, board minutes, foundation payments. I talk to Daniel again. I talk to people in Westbridge who saw you and your father there. When I have enough, we run the story." "And my brother?" Lucas asked. "You should tell him before I do," she said. He gave a small, humorless laugh. "He's going to see this as a betrayal." "Is it?" Lucas thought of Ethan's face in the conference room, tight with anger and fear, of their father's words echoing between them. "We stick to the story." "I don't know anymore," he admitted. "Maybe the betrayal was staying quiet this long." When he stepped out onto the sidewalk, the air felt colder than it had going in. He pulled his coat tighter around him and started walking, ignoring the car waiting at the curb for him. For once, he needed the time between places. Back at the Carter Tower, Ethan stood in front of a large window, watching the city below while a stylist adjusted the collar of his tuxedo. The gala was only hours away now, lights already being tested at the venue, photographers lining up, influencers rehearsing captions about redemption and reform. His phone buzzed with a notification, a short message from a contact in corporate security. Subject L. C. Met with journalist. Duration 1 HR 12 min. Private location. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Everything okay?" Melissa asked from the doorway, holding a stack of updated speech cards. "Perfect," he said, slipping the mask back on with practiced ease. "Tonight, we show the world who we are." He had no idea that, somewhere in a newsroom across town, a headline was already forming that would show them something very different. The article went live an hour before the gala. It wasn't flashy, no clickbait headline, just calm, devastating words at the top of the Sentinel's homepage, how the Carter Empire buried a fire, a death, and a boy. Rachel watched the traffic spike on her screen, numbers climbing, comments pouring in, emails dinging one after another. The story stretched like a scar across the browser. Photos of the ruined factory, quotes from Daniel, Marlene's overheard conversation, scanned documents with black lines and that small note, per council. And at the center of it all, a long on-the-record interview with Lucas Carter, his name, his title, his voice describing what his father had done. By the time the first guests stepped onto the red carpet outside the Carter Foundation gala, it was already trending. Business channels cut into their programming. News anchors' voices swelled with urgency. The hashtag #CarterFire began to curl around every corner of the internet. Inside the gala hall, a converted museum atrium glittering with chandeliers and brushed gold, Ethan checked his phone and felt the world tilt. A line of donors approached, hands outstretched for photos, but the screen in his palm held only one thing: Rachel's article. His name appeared 4 times, Lucas's appeared 23. "Ethan?" Melissa's voice cut through the roar in his head. "They're ready for you backstage. Teleprompter is set." He didn't move. "Where's my brother?" he asked. "He's on his way," she said. "Security said he's in the building." "Good," Ethan muttered, "because he and I are about to have a very public conversation." Backstage, the producer signaled, counting down to the broadcast stream. The gala wasn't just a room full of rich people. It was a carefully orchestrated online event, a reputation machine meant to beam the Carter brothers' faces into living rooms across the country. Rachel watched it on her laptop from the newsroom, surrounded by colleagues who had drifted over from their own desks. Some leaned on the backs of chairs, others stood with arms folded, the newsroom's usual cynicism softened by curiosity. "There he is," someone murmured as Ethan stepped onto the stage to applause that sounded a shade more hesitant than usual. He looked polished, composed, but Rachel saw the tightness around his eyes, the way his fingers curled too hard around the sides of the lectern. Behind him, a towering screen displayed the words, "Second Horizon Gala, Redemption in Action." "Good evening," Ethan began, his voice echoing through the hall, into cameras, and back out across the world. "Tonight is about second chances. About what we do when the system fails people who deserve better." On Rachel's second monitor, a business channel cut in with a banner, "Carter Gala proceeds as investigation rocks family empire." A split screen showed Ethan speaking, while a panel of commentators gestured at her article behind them. Ethan's phone, tucked in his inside pocket, buzzed once. A text from an unknown number. "You should let him speak." Ah. His gaze flicked to the wings. Lucas stood there in a black tux that didn't quite sit right on him tonight, like he'd borrowed someone else's life. Security hovered close, uncertain. The board chair, seated near the front, stared with an expression somewhere between warning and expectation. Ethan took a breath. "We've built our foundation on a simple belief," he continued, "that people deserve honest stories. Not spin, not cover-ups, the truth, even when it hurts." The words tasted like glass. He hadn't written them that way. He was improvising now, leaning into a precipice he hadn't planned. "In that spirit," he said slowly, "I'm going to do something my father never would have done in a moment like this." He gestured toward the wings. "Lucas," he said, voice carrying through the room and into every live stream, "join me." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Rachel leaned closer to the screen. This was not part of any schedule she'd seen. Lucas stepped out, the lights catching the faint stubble on his jaw, making him look more tired, more human. He walked to the lectern, stopped beside his brother. For a heartbeat, they stood there. Mirror images, one composed and burning, the other pale and resolute. Ethan didn't look at him. "Some of you have read a story that came out tonight," he said. "A story about our family, about a fire, about things buried that should never have been. The murmurs grew louder. Phones lit up across the hall as people checked headlines under the table. "I'm angry about that story," Ethan said. Then, after a beat, "but not for the reasons you might think." He finally turned to his brother. "You should have told me," he said, not bothering to hide the hurt. "Come to me before you went to the press." Lucas held his gaze, his own voice quiet but steady when he answered. "I did," he said, "for 10 years. Silence fell like a curtain, the kind that wasn't supposed to exist at a gala, least of all at one meant to celebrate redemption. "In Westbridge," Lucas said, turning to face the crowd and the cameras, 3 workers died in a factory fire. That's what the official record says. The truth is messier. Rachel listened as he told it again, this time not across a table in a dim bar, but into microphones and millions of living rooms. He talked about Daniel, about the twins, about a father who saw people as liabilities. He didn't spare himself. "I knew pieces of what happened," he said, "and I chose not to ask too many questions, because asking questions might have meant giving up the life I had, the one I shared with my brother." He glanced at Ethan again. "I let my father's fear become my own. That's on me, not on some rogue witness or misguided journalist." In the audience, faces shifted from discomfort to something else, sober attention, anger, sympathy. Donors checked their phones, recalculating. Board members exchanged glances that said more than any statement could. Ethan could feel the foundation of his carefully built world cracking under his feet. He wanted to grab the mic, to wrest control back, with the practiced ease he'd always relied on. But something in Lucas's voice, raw, unpolished, honest, held him in place. "When we started the Second Horizon Foundation," Lucas said, "we used words like accountability and justice in our branding. We owe those words something tonight." He looked straight into the nearest camera. "So here's what we're going to do." In the newsroom, Rachel's fingers hovered over her keyboard, ready to take notes even though she was already recording the stream. "We're commissioning an independent investigation into the Westbridge fire," Lucas said. "The Carters will not choose the investigators, and we will not control their findings. Whatever they uncover, we'll make public. All of it." A rustle swept through the front rows, the sound of legal departments mentally combusting in absentia. "Second," Lucas continued, "we're establishing a fund for the families harmed by that fire. Not as hush money, not as a quiet check, as recognition. Their names, their stories, their dead will be acknowledged officially. Finally." He swallowed, the next words catching. "And third, I will be stepping down from my role as co-CEO of the Carter Group, effective immediately, to cooperate fully without any appearance of self-protection." Gasps now, audible, unvarnished. Even Ethan's eyes widened. He hadn't known that part. "Lucas," he began. Lucas turned to him. "You don't have to follow me into this," he said softly. Words that only the nearest microphones caught. "But I hope you do." For the first time all night, Ethan didn't know how to perform. His father's voice roared in his memory, furious, warning, betrayed. "We survive what we bury." But right behind it, another memory. 2 boys in matching Little League uniforms on some old, forgotten newsprint, grinning just like he and Lucas once had. He reached for the microphone. The room held its breath. "My brother and I have fought about this for a long time," Ethan said. "Tonight, in a sense, I lost." He let out a sharp, unsteady breath, but maybe that's what needed to happen. He looked out at the crowd, at the cameras, at a world that had always applauded him for being untouchable. "I will also be stepping down," he said, "effective the same moment he does." He spoke faster now, before he could talk himself out of it. "Our board will appoint interim leadership. Our investigation will proceed without our hands on the wheel. And whatever comes next, We will face it as men, not as heirs hiding behind our father's shadow." In the newsroom, someone whispered, "Holy," and then remembered they were at work and didn't finish the sentence. Rachel just watched, stunned for the first time in a long time. This was not how power usually responded to exposure. On the stream, the gala's music cue failed to start. No one knew what to do with a moment that wasn't on the run of show. Then slowly, from the back, someone clapped, one pair of hands, then another, then a few more. Not the raucous applause of a brand launch, something more complicated, more real. Not everyone joined in. Some people stayed seated, arms crossed, calculating losses. But enough did that the sound filled the hall. For once, the twins didn't smile for the cameras. They just stood there, side by side, the light catching on their identical profiles, looking less like untouchable millionaires and more like two men about to walk into the hardest chapter of their lives. Everyone thought that was the end of the story. It wasn't the way it used to. The company's stock had dipped, then stabilized under interim leadership. Government investigators had released a blistering report. The Westbridge fire was preventable, safety violations had been ignored, testimony had been shaped to protect profits. The findings named Michael Carter directly. They also confirmed something else. There had been 4 victims. The 4th didn't appear on any original public record, no obituary, no listed family. Just a string of numbers and a pseudonym, shuttled through internal memos and confidential medical files. Rachel stood in the parking lot of a sprawling rehab facility in North Carolina, wind tugging at her hair. The building looked like any other modern medical center. Clean lines, neutral colors, a row of trees along the drive to soften the concrete. It could have been a school or a corporate campus, anything but what it really was. A place where forgotten lives were stored quietly out of sight. She wasn't alone. Daniel stood beside her, shoulders squared but trembling slightly, his weathered hands working at the brim of his cap. He'd put on his best shirt for this, a faded blue button-down that still didn't quite hide the grease stains at the cuffs. His daughter, Emily, leaned into his arm, her eyes red but clear. On the other side of Rachel, the twins waited. Ethan in a simple grey suit, no tie, his hair less styled than the photos that still floated around the internet. Lucas beside him, wearing the same expression he'd had at the gala, a mix of fear and a strange, fragile relief. "Last chance to turn back," Ethan said quietly, his voice closer to human than to the polished version the world used to know. "Nobody would blame you." Daniel huffed out a breath that was almost a laugh. "You spent 10 years telling me what I had to live with," he said. "You don't get to start now." They went in together. A nurse met them in the hallway outside the long-term care wing, her badge reading Caroline. She looked from Daniel to the brothers, recognition flickering in her eyes when she saw the last name on the clipboard. "You're here for Eli," she said gently. Daniel flinched at the sound of his son's name spoken aloud by a stranger. "You know him?" Caroline nodded. "I've worked this floor 8 years," she said. "He's one of my patients." Rachel felt her throat tighten. "Can you tell us what to expect?" Caroline hesitated, choosing her words. "He was brought in with severe smoke inhalation and a traumatic brain injury," she said. "He doesn't speak much. Motor function is limited, but he responds in his way. He has good days and bad. Does he know who he is?" Emily asked, voice barely above a whisper. The nurse's expression softened. "He knows more than people think," she said. "He reacts to certain things, voices, names." Her gaze flicked to the twins, sometimes to faces. They walked down a quiet hall, the air carrying that mixture of antiseptic and something sadder that every hospital seems to hold. TVs murmured behind half-closed doors. A wheelchair squeaked somewhere out of sight. Caroline stopped at a room near the end. "He's awake," she said. "Take your time." Daniel's hand shook as he reached for the handle. For years he had pictured his son as a ghost, stuck forever at 14, frozen in smoke and fire. The idea of meeting a 30-something version of that boy, changed, altered, but breathing, felt almost impossible to hold. The room was small but bright, sunlight spilling across white sheets. Machines hummed softly in the background. In the bed, propped up on pillows, a man stared at the flicker of a muted television mounted on the wall. His hair, once dark in the photos, was now shot through with threads of grey. One side of his face carried faint scars, the skin puckered near his temple. His right hand lay curled against his chest, fingers stiff. His eyes, though, those were the same, deep, watchful, a little confused. "Eli," Daniel said, the name catching on his tongue. The man's gaze shifted. Slowly, like it took effort, he turned his head toward the door. His eyes moved over Rachel, over Ethan, and then landed on Lucas. He stared. Something flickered there, recognition, or the ghost of it. His brow furrowed, his lips parted, no sound coming at first. Lucas took a step forward, feeling like his chest was too small for his lungs. This was the life his father had bought with hush money and legal language, a breathing, thinking human being turned into a hidden equation. "Hi, Eli," Lucas said quietly. "My name is Lucas." Eli's eyes searched his face. His gaze flicked once, twice between Lucas and Ethan, taking in the matching features, the mirrored lines. His left hand twitched against the sheet, the muscles obeying in jerks and stutters. "Lou," he managed finally, the syllable pushed out with effort. "Lou." Daniel's breath hitched. "Yeah, son," he whispered. "That's him. That's Lucas." Slowly, Eli's gaze shifted to Ethan. His mouth worked again. "Two," he said, the words slurred but clear enough. "Two of 'em." The room held its breath. Rachel felt tears burn at the back of her eyes. All the articles, all the documents, all the nights hunched over records and transcripts, and none of it had prepared her for this. The way truth could sit in a hospital bed, broken but still breathing, still counting, still seeing. "We're sorry," Ethan said suddenly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but we're sorry." Lucas stepped closer to the bed. "My father made choices that hurt you," he said. "Then he hid you. We let him. We're trying to make it right now. It'll never be enough, but we're going to spend the rest of our lives trying." Eli stared at them, his chest rising and falling. After a moment, he shifted his eyes to Daniel, then to Emily, then back to the twins. A faint, crooked smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. "Still here," he whispered hoarsely. Daniel broke. He moved to the bed and took his son's good hand in both of his, bowing his head over it. Emily clung to the foot of the bed, shoulders shaking. Rachel stepped back, giving them space. Her journalist's mind noted every detail, but something else inside her, the part that had driven her to chase this story in the first place, simply bore witness. Later, in the parking lot, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, she turned to the brothers. "What happens now?" she asked. Ethan leaned against the car, looking more tired than she'd ever seen him. "Legally," he said. "There'll be lawsuits, settlements, maybe charges. We'll cooperate. We'll pay what we can, lose what we have to. And personally," Lucas glanced back at the building. "Personally," he said, "I think we start with showing up. Here, in Westbridge, for people like Daniel and Eli, not with cameras and big checks, but with actual time." He looked at Rachel. "You're going to write all of this, aren't you?" She nodded. "That's my part," she said, "telling it, even the parts that don't make you look good, especially those." Ethan gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe for once, that's the point," he said. "We spent years curating a story. It's time people saw the whole one." Months later, the follow-up article would run not just about corruption and cover-ups, but about what came after, about a town slowly getting the truth it had been denied, about a father sitting in a rehab room every weekend, reading aloud to a son who listened with his eyes, about two millionaire twins who traded boardrooms for hearings and hospital corridors, learning, too late but still in time, that redemption wasn't a branding strategy. It was showing up over and over when the cameras were gone. The Carters never got their old shine back, but in its place, something quieter grew. Not forgiveness, not fully, but a different kind of name, one that, in Westbridge at least, no longer made people lower their voices when they said it. Standing outside the rehab center one evening as the light faded, Rachel closed her notebook for the last time on this story. She'd chased a dark family crime and found more than she expected, not a neat ending, but a messy, human attempt to live with what couldn't be undone. Some secrets don't stay buried, and sometimes, when they finally claw their way to the surface, they don't just destroy, they change. If you're enjoying these stories, subscribe to the channel and follow the next videos. And tell us in the comments what this story meant to you.